Morning. Should point out that this morning there's no handout to accompany the sermon. We're going to spend most of our time in the first 13 verses of Matthew 25, though we'll get a little bit of context in Matthew 24 prior to that. But most of the morning we're going to be in the same text. So I opted not to print a handout. It's going to be very straightforward. We're just going to spend our time reading, examining, and making some applications from the parable of the 10 virgins spoken of by Jesus in Matthew chapter 25. This is a section of Scripture that is complicated, but not overly complicated if you read closely, if you pay attention to the details. A lot has been made of what this chapter teaches, Matthew 23, 24 especially, and a little bit of Matthew 25. But a lot of ideas have been promoted from these chapters I think are false. And again, I think a lot of it is just a failure to faithfully read the text in its proper context and to notice the details and specifics of what's actually being spoken of. So before we really give our attention to the primary text in Matthew 25, let's notice the setting, the context here. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is, he's really sticking it to the Pharisees, really letting them have it. We know this section is a series of woes. Woe unto the Pharisees, woe unto you hypocrites. And he really tears into them as the religious leadership who had failed. Jesus needed to be harsh with them, and so he was. He concludes Matthew 23, and as he gets into Matthew 24, he kind of leaves off on this note of something catastrophic is going to happen in Jerusalem. So at the end of Matthew chapter 23, as Jesus is concluding his discussion, his diatribe against the Pharisees, Matthew 23 and verse 34, "Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, so that upon you may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation." Said, history is repeating itself. Just like all the prophets of old, your forefathers killed them and rejected the warnings they brought from God. You're doing the same, and something's going to come upon this generation. He laments over Jerusalem here in verse 37. Jerusalem, Jerusalem. So that gives us a focal point. What he's talking about and what he will be discussing in the next chapter is an emphasis on Jerusalem. Something focused there, and something soon to come upon this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. For I say to you, from now on, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So their house will be left desolate because they have rejected God's warnings. Now in Matthew chapter 24, something I think we need to clearly understand, look at verse 34. Matthew 24 is a scripture that people have taken and they've applied it very literally to some yet future to happen timeline, something that remains even for us today out in the future. But when you look closely at the details, that is clearly not what is being taught in Matthew 24. Jesus is talking about some catastrophic event that is soon to occur. Matthew 24 and verse 34, towards the end of this chapter, he says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So what Jesus has discussed up until that point at least is something that will soon take place within the context of that very generation. 2,000 years later, that generation has died away. So whatever Jesus has described here in verse 24, it has already happened. Chapter 24 has already happened. It was soon to happen in their context, and is also centralized and localized near Jerusalem. Another point we need to notice in the details. In Matthew chapter 24, look at verse 2. And he said to them, do you not see all these things? No, verse 1, his disciples came up and they pointed out the temple buildings to us. And look at this. Look at how grand the temple is. The temple in the days of Herod, he had kind of refurbished it a little bit, and though it might not have been as glorious as Solomon's temple, the original temple there, it was still a pretty grand sight. And Jesus said to them in verse 2, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." Jesus is describing a catastrophic event that will take place at the temple, around Jerusalem. Historically, at 70 AD, when Titus marches against Jerusalem and destroys it. That's what Jesus is talking about here. As well as in verse 16. This always kind of cracks me up when people say this is about the second coming of Christ or the rapture or the end times yet to happen. In verse 16 he said, "Then let those who are in Judea, they must flee to the mountains." Are you really going to run away from Jesus when he returns? Are you really going to be able to escape when he comes back? And as 2 Peter chapter 3 says, he's going to destroy everything physical with intense heat, the earth, and everything will be burned up and cease to exist. Yet his advice to you is when Jesus comes back, run for the hills. He's saying, discern the signs. Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. This temple is going to be torn down. Something catastrophic is coming. And when you recognize the signs, this is about to happen, run for your lives. Get away from Jerusalem. So I don't want to spend too much more time on discussing Matthew 24, but those are some critical points we need to understand as far as context. He is describing something that will soon take place and something that will be localized in Jerusalem. Therefore, the rest of the chapter, Jesus is giving them warnings. Have your eyes open. Be prepared for this. In verse 36, he says this is going to be like the days of Noah. No one really knows exactly when this is going to happen, not even the angels nor the Son of Man, in verse 36. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. He says this, you got to be ready for this. Something is going to take place, and you've got to be prepared. It's going to be just like the days of Noah. You won't know exactly when. You're not going to get a final countdown. It's going to happen in a day you're not expecting it. It's described like a thief in the night in verse 42. Again, there's a theme in why Jesus concludes this discourse with parables or illustrations to teach us the simple point of be ready. Be prepared at all times. It's going to come like a thief in the night. It says, you better believe if someone knows that someone's going to break into their house that night, they'll be prepared. They'll be ready for that thief. But that's not how thieves operate. They don't send you a letter in the mail and says, on October 31st at 8 p.m., I'm going to break into your garage. See you then. That's not how thieves operate. They come when you don't expect it. And he gives this description of two servants. And let's read this, verse 45. Who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household, to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour which he does not know. That's the theme. In all these examples, it happens. God takes action when you are not expecting it. Therefore, as Scar from Lion King sang about, be prepared. You know, I think about a fireman. The way their clothes are set up, and you can see in that illustration there, they've got all their gear laid out at the fire station, and they keep their boots inside their pants there so they can just hop in and pull them straight up and over their shoulders and go. I do the same thing. I leave my shoes and socks inside my pants, and, you know, I'm accused of being a slob or a pig. I just say I like to be ready to go, prepared. But that's what Jesus is saying. Now, something does take place. People debate as to when and where. I am firmly 100% convinced everything up till verse 36 is clearly talking about something that will take place within the context of Jesus' generation and regarding the temple of Jerusalem, where people should run away from that. It is not at all talking about the final judgment. Yet when we come to chapter 25, especially the end, When it talks about the Son of Man returning with the angels and the sound of the trumpet, and he will gather and separate sheep on the right, goats on the left, and some to eternal life, some to eternal death. And that sure sounds like the final judgment. At some point, it transitions. Maybe there's some overlap. My purpose here this morning isn't to discuss when and where or precisely when the discussion, because there are people who argue that all of chapter 24 and all of chapter 25 are talking about Jerusalem's destruction and not the final judgment. There are people who say it happens to switch at verse 36 in chapter 24. Or some people, I tend to think maybe at chapter 25 is where it transitions to talking about the final judgment, but that's beside the point. Because what we're talking about is preparedness. Whether it was Jesus, his audience, right then and there preparing for the destruction of Jerusalem, the point is still the same for us today. Jesus will return one more time on a day that we don't know. We're not given any signs, any warnings, any preparation. It'll be like a thief in the night. And so the same principle applies to us today. The same lesson about being prepared, whether this context is about Jerusalem's destruction or the final judgment, is still the same lesson. So we're not going to discuss exactly, when this transition takes place, but I just want us to understand the context. It starts in chapter 24, dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem, and perhaps through chapter 25, as now we get to our text, the story of the 10 virgins. This likely is now transitioning to a discussion of when Jesus returns the final time, not a destruction of Jerusalem, but to come and destroy the world altogether, and we face judgment. The lesson is still the same. I hope that point is clear. So let's read through the first 13 verses here of chapter 25 now. Then the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were prudent. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the prudent took oil in flasks along with their lamps. Now while the bridegroom was delaying, they all got drowsy and began to sleep. And do you see a similar theme as to the last couple of illustrations in chapter 24? The bridegroom is coming at a time when later than they assumed, not when they expected he would. Okay, so we're still in the same theme here. And they all got drowsy and began to sleep. Verse 6, but at midnight there was a shout, behold, the bridegroom, come out to meet him. Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the prudent, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the prudent answered, no, there will not be enough for us and you too. Go instead to the dealers and buy some for yourselves. And while they were going away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. Later the other virgins also came, saying, Lord, Lord, open up for us. But he answered, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour. And verse 13 tells us exactly the purpose of this story. Be on the alert, for you do not know the day nor the hour. This lesson applied to those people who lived in Jerusalem, around Jerusalem, regarding the coming destruction. It applies to Christians today who are awaiting the final return of Christ and the destruction of everything physical and the final judgment. The same lessons apply. And so we've got this basic contrast between foolish and prudent, wise and those who made mistakes, those who didn't plan. We can relate to those who are foolish. Anybody here ever run out of gas in your car? I see some nodding heads. That seems like it should be basically impossible today. I could understand 50 or 60 years ago when, who knows, you had something floating in your gas tank to tell you empty or full. That didn't seem very precise, but now they measure everything electronically. You've got a little warning light that comes on. The E just means extra 40 miles. I don't know. We do this to ourselves still, even with all of the advanced warnings. We run out of gas, We make these mistakes because we didn't prepare, we didn't think enough. Or sometimes we just don't think. Like these foolish virgins, they didn't bring oil with them. They brought their torches, but they failed to bring a reserve of oil that would make their torches last any length of time. Sometimes we get so caught up. I mean, maybe this is a parallel with what Jesus described, those people who are invited and they made all these excuses. No, I've recently been married, or I've got a new team of oxen I'm trying to break in. We get so caught up in the worries and cares of the world, we're distracted and forget vital things. Yesterday, we had our costume party, and I was running a little behind, and I had to go to Target and pick up a couple of items. But the reason I went to Target is because I needed a Target gift card. I'm running behind. I've got Navy with me. I'm driving all the way from West Jordan out here to Kaysville. And so I'm rushing. I get all the things on the list. I go through the checkout line, get in the car, and start driving off, and realize I didn't get a Target gift card. That's the whole reason I went to Target. So I had to stop at Centerville on my way and go into Target there. And also to get ice that I forgot. See, I got in such a rush, I forgot something. That was the whole reason I went to Target. And I just got so distracted by everything else weighing me down, I missed my entire purpose in going there. We can relate to the foolish, but we had better heed the warning. As relatable these foolish versions are, nonetheless, this is a warning for us to heed. Be on the alert, Jesus said. You need to prepare ahead of time. That is the basic message of all of this section. So there's a lot of contrast, but there are some striking similarities. And here's where I want to start making some, I think, important applications for us today. There is one striking similarity between both the wise and the foolish. Some prepared, some were not, but you know what it says in verse 5? Now, while the bridegroom was delaying, they all got drowsy and began to sleep. We have two different types, foolish and wise. Yet one thing they both had in common, they all started to nod off. They all started to drift into sleep. You know what this tells me is this is something that's going to happen to everybody. Whether you're prepared or not, at times in life, spiritually speaking, we're all going to have those moments, those periods of time, those phases where we drift away, where spiritually we start to become drowsy. We nod off. This is a common experience to everybody, foolish and wise alike. They all started to get tired. You ever experienced that spiritually? You ever started to drift away where you're not ready? You ever had that thought in the back of your mind? I know that Jesus is coming back, and I don't know when. There'll be a blast of a trumpet, and I know from time to time, Paul will do an invitation where he describes a kind of a dramatic depiction of what that might be like when Jesus returns. It's a pretty neat thing, and I always like when Paul does that. But you ever thought about that? I know this is coming. What if that happened right now? Would I be ready? Or have I been caught sleeping, not expecting it? We all experience these periods of time in our life where spiritually we become dull. Let's describe this a little more detail, what it means to start nodding off, where we start to become drowsy or drift into sleep. Well, you know what it's like when maybe you're the one who's falling asleep and it's your husband or your wife giving you a nudge. Kyle, wake up, you're snoring, or you need to get off the couch, you need to go to bed, you're starting to fall asleep. And how does the sleepy person respond? Huh? What? No. You're not hearing it. You're saying, no, just leave me alone. You're not hearing what they're saying. You have to speak louder and louder. Wake up. You need to get up out of the couch and go upstairs and go to bed. You're falling asleep. They become dull of hearing. In Hebrews chapter 5, we notice in verse 11, I think this is exactly what we're looking at when it comes to spiritually falling asleep, when we are not in a state of anticipation or preparedness for Christ to return. Hebrews 5 and verse 11, concerning him, that is Jesus, we have much to say, and it is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. When we're not thinking clearly, when we're not hearing, when we're not paying attention, we are vulnerable. Hebrews chapter 2, it describes this process of drifting. And you know how gradual it can be, falling asleep? You know, you're driving along and you ever had that? Were you probably driving when you shouldn't have been because you're so tired? And just how slowly and gradual this process is, where your eyelids just get a little bit heavier until they fall shut. It's drifting. It happens so subtly we don't even notice it. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1. For this reason we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard so that we do not drift away from it. That's the danger, is slowly eroding our faith and convictions, is slowly drifting away from God, slowly moving to a state where we're not even paying attention to our lives, to where if Christ came right here, right now, this very moment, he'd catch us sleeping, catch us in sin, doing things that we're not supposed to do, not living the way we're supposed to be living because we had drifted into a state of spiritual sleep. If we go back to our text in Matthew 25, notice in chapter 24 and verse 12, I think this is the same idea here. When we talk about hot or cold or lukewarm, it's the same concept. Matthew 24 and verse 12, because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. This describes a process of going to sleep. And this is all 10 virgins. Prepared and unprepared, wise and foolish alike, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. And what was it that woke them from that sleep? A loud noise. Behold the bridegroom! Come and meet him. If you were drifting off, I bet you're awake now. But you ever done that where you're awoken from a sleep? This is an instantaneous wake-up call. When they hear this, they are instantly woken up. They hear this shout, behold the bridegroom, and it's not like wait, what's going on? Okay, let me get myself ready. They wake up and you've experienced that too, where your alarm didn't go off and you wake up and you look around like, it's awfully bright for the morning, and it's an instantaneous awake, and all of a sudden the sleepiness is gone. They have this warning call, and they woke up instantly. This is the remedy to spiritual drowsiness. Someone needs to shout, wake up, because the bridegroom is here. I look at this as the essence of what I do on a day-by-day basis as a preacher. It is my responsibility, my obligation to God and to my brethren, as it is for any person who has chosen to preach the gospel, to wake people up from sleep, to remind my brethren of this very important reality, that Christ is coming back and we don't know when. Just like the days of Noah, just like the faithful or wicked servant who their master was delayed, and he comes at a time when they don't expect it, just like a thief in the night. This day is coming. You need to be ready for it. You don't know when it's going to happen, so you need to be ready right now. Sometimes the delay makes us think, oh, well, it'll come later. I have time. I can get my life together later. No, you can't, because it will come when you are not expecting it. You need to wake up and be prepared for the coming of Christ. You need to live a life that is in accordance with Christ. You need to walk according to your calling as a saint. This is a very important reason why we assemble together as a church, as a congregation. I mentioned falling asleep at the wheel. It's easier to do those long overnight road trips when you got 1 or 2 or 3 other people in the car with you, right? They help keep you awake. That's why we need one another. Sometimes we need to hear that shout. Wake up. Sometimes we see somebody spiritually who is drifting asleep, And we need to be the person. It's not just coming from me as the preacher, but we need to be accountable to one another. We need to go and wake up each other. We see the signs of it. You see the evidence of someone who's sleepy. You can always tell when they're sleepy, when they're nodding off. I see it every Sunday morning. I know what it looks like. Spiritually, we can recognize it sometimes too in others. We start to see people less. We start to get the impression they're giving a minimal effort, that they're just not interested. We need to go and not chide those people for having bad attendance, but go out of love because I'm worried about you. I think you're drifting into sleep. I don't think you're prepared for Christ. Sometimes the evidence, though, isn't on the outside. Sometimes it's only evident to God who knows our hearts and to you and yourself alone. Internally, are you harboring anger? We're supposed to be people of love. Are you angry all the time? Maybe people don't see that, but inside, are you judgmental? Are you always looking at people and saying, get off my back, you have your own problems too? Do you ever do this where you speak things that are not kind, but behind people's back? You ever done that where you're carrying on a conversation with someone, as soon as they leave the room, you keep on talking, saying things that are horrible, but you don't want them to hear it? You ever done that to your spouse, your boss, when they leave your office and continue the conversation, but in a very mean way? These are hidden things that no one else sees, but to you, you recognize that. When there's something dark in your heart, that's a warning sign that you're falling asleep, and you need someone to come and shout, wake up. Christ is coming back. You will face your Creator, and you will give an account, and you will give a recompense for your deeds in this life. That is a sobering reality, and it should wake you up. A second remedy we see when it comes to drowsiness is when we are woken up, we need to look to ourselves. And this is something that is kind of shocking. Back in Matthew 25, verse 7, then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the prudent, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. And we think as Christians we're supposed to help each other, right? So why did they not give them some of their oil? And here's kind of the point. You need to take care of yourself. This is something, no one else can do this for you, this preparedness. Somebody can't do that for you. If they had given some of their oil, there would not be enough to go around. That's just how it works. Yes, as Christians, we are supposed to help each other out, but we need to remember, this is not a parable that teaches 100 different points. This is teaching one basic point, to be prepared. That's the point of this story. Be prepared, and someone else can't do that for you spiritually. Someone else can't read the Bible for you. Someone else can't pray for you. I mean, they will pray on your behalf, but that doesn't mean the same thing as if you were praying for yourself. Someone else can't do these things for you. We can wake up our brethren. We can look out for our brethren and try to wake them up and help them and look out for our brethren. But when it comes to the preparedness, I got to take care of me. You got to take care of you. I can try to wake you up and encourage you to prepare yourself, but you've got to do the preparing on your own. We help each other in this, but that's the point I get from these couple of verses. We got to look to ourselves first. If we go back to Matthew chapter 7, I think the same basic concept is here. When it says in Matthew 7 and verse 3, why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Take care of yourself first before you start going and trying to judge on others or help others or deal with others' problems. Deal with your own problems first. That's kind of the point here. We have to take care of ourselves. We can look out for our brethren. We can try and encourage them and stimulate them to do the work they're supposed to do. But at the end of the day, they've got to do it for themselves. You've got to do it for yourself. And what do I mean by being prepared? I mean having a relationship, having some reserve, some credit with God, so to speak. And I know that that's a little bit misleading of a statement, because I'm not suggesting that we earn our salvation by doing enough good things, and therefore we have credit. But what I mean is we have a credible relationship with God. Notice again how this section ends. Verse 13. Matthew 25 and verse 13. Be on the alert then, for you do not know. Verse 12. When they show up late, the doors are closed. But he answered, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Does that sound familiar? Go back to Matthew 7 one more time. Verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, exactly what those 5 foolish virgins said. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. What's at the focal point here is having a relationship with God. At the end of the day, you can't fake that. You can't say, I wore the name Christian, I went to church every Sunday. But if you aren't prepared, if you aren't establishing and developing daily a relationship with God, you don't have any oil stored up. You have nothing. And when you get to that final judgment, he will look at you and say, I don't know you. I never knew you. We need to be prepared in the sense of having a relationship where we learn and cultivate faith and trust in his grace, where we come to know him and know of his love for us, and that develops within us a greater love for him and a greater zeal for good works. But we have to know him. Otherwise, we won't have any reserves. He'll look at us and say, I don't know you, and I never knew you. It's important that he knows us. I could say, I know Weird Al Yankovic. I met him after a concert. I know him. But you're probably like, so? Thousands and thousands of people have met him after concerts or at, autograph signings. A lot of people can say they know him. If you ask Weird Al, do you know Kyle Goodwin? He would say, who? That would mean something totally different. I said, he knows me and we're friends. It's the same thing with God. You can't just say, I know him. Lord, Lord, didn't I do this in your name? Does he know you? Do you have a real relationship? Is there something there that when you do, as inevitably will happen to all of us, when you do drift off, become drowsy, when you are woken from that sleep, do you have some solid foundation of a relationship built up with him? And are you prepared for that? And then verse 10, they started trimming their wicks right away. They got themselves ready again. While they were going away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. When they were woken from their sleep, they started to get things ready again so they could go on their way and be ready. This is going to happen to you in your life. Maybe it's happening to you right now where you are drifting into sleep. You need to wake up. I'm trying to shout to you right now. Christ is coming. You don't know when. It could be this very day. And you need to be ready for that. You need to be studying, reading, praying, developing a strong relationship with your Savior. But once you wake up and realize, I've been off track, if he came right now, I wouldn't be ready, you need to get yourself ready again. Get back to work is kind of the point. I'd like to conclude by just reflecting on the idea of a wedding. I don't really understand all of the customs of a Jewish wedding as took place in that time period. And perhaps this isn't even a perfect reflection. I don't know if that's really a custom where they lock the doors if you're 5 minutes late. I was 15 minutes late to my own party yesterday. I'm glad the doors weren't shut and said, tough luck. I don't know if this is meant to be like, here's exactly how a wedding went, but maybe this is just a story to teach a simple point. Be ready, because when those doors are closed, there is no second chance. And that's a party you don't want to miss. Revelation 19 and verse 9, then he said to me, write, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. How sad it is to be locked out of somewhere you really want to be. We're told that this is going to be for all eternity. We're told that our actions in life, the decisions we make, the choices we make right here and right now will have eternal ramifications. You don't want to be on the outside wishing you were inside for all eternity. I know that much for sure. Let me finish in 2 Peter chapter 3. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10. But the day of the Lord will come, it will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? And that's a good question. Prepared people. If you're someone who is acknowledging that you are drifting into sleep, that you are not ready, if the horns blasted right now and we saw Christ in the sky and it was the end, would you be excited? Would it be anticipation, joy? Or would it be terror because you know, I'm not ready? If there's any way we can help you be ready, answering questions, studying the Bible with you, praying with you, encouraging you, you need to confess and repent of sins, we can help you in that. You need to be baptized and put Christ on in baptism, have your sins washed away. We invite you to make that known right now and come forward as we stand and sing.